Now, you might not believe it, but by the year 1900, one of the premier towns in East Tennessee was Oliver Springs. Yes, sir. Thanks to the abundant healing mineral waters that flowed from the mountains, this town was an international tourist destination that was known all over the world. Between the tourism industry and the booming coal mining in the area, the town had a bustling economy and a beautiful downtown area situated right on the railroad tracks. One day, a wealthy businessman new to the area named Paul DeBlue was watching as the wealthy tourist stopped off the train at the depot station, and he thought to himself, you know, those folks sure do look thirsty after that long train ride. And suddenly, in that moment, he had a brilliant idea on how to cash in on the booming tourist and coal industry at the same time. I know what I'll do. I'll create a soda pop business. Now, it was also about this time that the soft drink industry was taking off all across America in full force due to the popularity of the newly invented Coca-Cola. But what a lot of folks don't realize is that during the early 1900s, nearly every self-respecting town had a local businessman that sold their own version of knockoff Coca-Colas. Oliver Springs, Tennessee was no different. And this is the true story of the Oliver Springs Bottling Works that operated from 1900 to the start of the Great Depression. The story of the Oliver Springs Bottling Works actually begins on the other side of the world in Burgundy, France, where a man named Victor Latour was a university student studying under the world-famous chemist Eugene Pelagat. After Victor earned a degree as a pharmacist in France, he moved to New Orleans in 1866, and he opened up a bottling works selling his own brands of soda pop. Like many pharmacists of the day, Victor marketed his drink as a cure for headaches and depression. Victor had several employees at his bottle works, and his right-hand man was his brother-in-law, Paul DeBlue. Now, Paul had never been to college and most certainly wasn't a pharmacist, but he was a smart man and a fast learner. And before you knew it, he had learned the entire process to creating soda pop and how to run a bottling works. Now, Victor's bottling operation in New Orleans proved to be very profitable, so much so that he purchased an 800-acre farm in Morgan County, Tennessee, right outside of Wartburg. He asked Paul to help him run the farm, and the duo developed a beautiful showplace farm that was growing grapes and producing a high-quality wine that rivaled the wines back in France. Now, Paul, he began to fall in love with the beauty of East Tennessee, and he couldn't help but notice that there were bottling works popping up all over the area due to the overnight success of the newly invented Coca-Cola. It seemed that every town in the area was selling their own knockoff versions of the drinks. Heck, there was one in Coal Creek, another one in Harriman, and up the road in Bristol. They were selling drinks like Gayola and Coca-Nola and many others. Most folks in the area couldn't read the labels during those days, so to them, the knockoff versions were just as good as the real thing. Now, Paul wasn't a pharmacist, but he knew the whole process he had learned while working in New Orleans. Now, I've always said the only difference between a college-educated man and a man with good common sense was that one of them was holding an expensive piece of paper. Yes, sir, and Paul was about to prove me right. So, with that, Paul moved just a few miles down the road to Oliver Springs, and he purchased a building that was once used as a whiskey distillery. That's right, the distillery had flourished during the 1880s thanks to the thirst of the coal miners and the railroad construction workers. But, for some reason, it had closed by the year 1900. That same water that went into the whiskey was now going into Paul's soft drinks. He gave them creative names like Iron Brew and Coca-Cola, keg cider, and all sorts of fruit flavors, with the most popular being strawberry. The spot was perfect since the mineral springs from the distillery were still flowing and some of the best tasting water in East Tennessee. Now, Paul was actually purchasing the syrup for Coca-Cola from a distributor marketing the knockoff Coke brands to bottlers all over Tennessee. Paul began giving out free samples of his drinks to the curious, and he sold 8-ounce bottles for a nickel each, with a money-back guarantee if you didn't like it. The strategy paid off, and soon Paul was selling his drinks to the Oliver Springs Hotel and the Windrock coal mines. Paul hired several boys to help out with the operation. Those boys would wash bottles all day long for 50 cents. Soon everybody in town was stopping by the Oliver Springs Bottling Works, and even began referring to Paul as Uncle Paul. Yes, sir, it was quite a sight to see Uncle Paul operating the machines that filled the bottles. It was a complicated operation that required a lot of skill. He would put the bottle cap up in the machine with a finger on his right hand. Then he would squirt the proper amount of syrup into the bottle with a lever with his left hand. Then his right hand would engage a lever that injected the carbonated water under pressure into the bottle with a loud hiss. Then, at the same time, he would stamp heavily with his right foot on a lever that put the cap on the bottle. That's right. Both hands and one foot were in operation at the same time. And to make things more complicated, many times the bottles would just simply explode with a bang from the pressure of the carbonated water. Glass would fly everywhere, so Uncle Paul worked from behind a shield while wearing a leather apron and leather cuffs on his wrist. Each time Uncle Paul couldn't get a cap to seal on the bottle correctly, he would just simply pass it to one of the boys working for him and tell him, just drink it. Many nights, the boys went home with a belly full from drinking up to 10 bottles in a single day. Uncle Paul eventually moved the operation into a better location in town, and he operated the bottling works for nearly 30 years. When you think about it, it's a pretty amazing achievement for a man who never went to a university in France or studied under a world-famous chemist. No, Uncle Paul didn't need no piece of paper diploma. The Oliver Springs Bottling Works eventually closed due to pressures from Coca-Cola and the Great Depression. Yet, here we are, over 100 years later, and bottle collectors all over the world are paying thousands of dollars for one of the Oliver Springs bottles. That's right, they're prized possessions to the few folks that own them. I was lucky enough to film several of them while the production of this video was going on. Now, if you'd like to see one in person, contact the Oliver Springs Historical Society. They have 2 in their museum. I like to think that somewhere Uncle Paul is looking down, taking a sip of that famous strawberry pop, and smiling. Thanks for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel, where I share all sorts of Appalachian history and storytelling. Till next time, my friends.